The first time Maggie saw him, he was licking syrup off an abandoned napkin in the trash bin behind the Hope Street diner, not stealing or digging, and just standing there still as death, trying to taste warmth from paper. It was 6:04 a.m. The air was 29 degrees and falling. Inside, the fryer hissed. Outside, the boy didn't shiver. He just folded the napkin neatly, placed it back in the bin, and walked away like he hadn't existed. Most people in that neighborhood had learned to look past pain. Maggie used to be one of them. But something about the way he moved, like a soldier retreating from a war no one saw, split her open. He was black. 10. Alone. And every inch of him whispered what America tries hardest to ignore, that hunger wears no sign. It just waits. And from that morning on, so did she. The first time Maggie Wells saw the boy, he was kneeling behind the diner, cupping his hands beneath the leaking grease trap. Not drinking, just watching the thick brown liquid drip like it might, somehow, turn into something else. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't ashamed. He was still, too still for a child. The kind of stillness people carry only after they've been forgotten. It was just past 6. Maggie had stepped out back for a smoke she'd long promised to quit, letting the morning chill bite through her thin sweater. The first thing she noticed wasn't the boy. It was the silence. The kind that hums louder than sound, like the world holding its breath. And then she saw him. 10 years old, maybe less, bones sharp against skin the color of midnight, and worn shoes that whispered of long miles walked alone. He didn't ask for food. He didn't meet her eyes. He simply stood, nodded once, like he was excusing himself for existing, and disappeared down the alley. In America, we talk about children. We legislate for them, parade them across campaigns, and drape them in flags. But the ones who slip through, those who eat hope for breakfast and sleep with one eye open, they belong to no one. Jabari was one of them. A name Maggie didn't yet know, a story not yet told. A child was already learning that survival meant silence. That morning, she didn't follow him. She didn't call after him or ask where his parents were. She just stood there, cigarette burning between her fingers, something aching in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Inside, the diner was coming to life. Coffee pots sputtering, eggs hissing on the flat top, country radio playing something forgettable. Regulars stumbled in, ordering the same things, telling the same jokes, and complaining about gas prices and politics. And Maggie? She cracked eggs and filled mugs like always, but something had shifted. The rhythm she'd worn like armor now felt hollow. She saw him again the next morning. Same time. Same quiet corner booth. A glass of water and a book. He didn't turn the page. He didn't speak. He didn't eat. He just sat with his backpack propped beside him, as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling through the cracks. Maggie brought him pancakes. She claimed the kitchen had messed up. He stared at the plate as if it were a trap, then ate with a hunger so controlled that it broke her. The next day, scrambled eggs, then oatmeal. And just like that, a ritual formed, one she never spoke of, one he never questioned. People began to notice. Some sneered, some joked, some asked why she bothered. But Maggie remembered what it was like to be invisible. It meant to be seen for the first time not with suspicion, but with mercy. She didn't know his name. She didn't need to, because kindness, the kind that costs something real, doesn't wait for a reason. And neither did she. This story didn't start with a hero. It began with a plate of food, a boy no one saw, and a woman who chose to. What came next would shake a town, stir a nation's conscience, and prove that sometimes the smallest act is the one that echoes forever. The pancakes were always warm, never fancy, never piled high or drizzled with whipped cream, just simple, soft, golden, and waiting. Maggie placed them on the corner booth like a quiet offering, The kind made by people who don't expect thank yous, just silence that feels a little less cold. Jabari never spoke much. He didn't need to. His thanks were evident in the way he sat straighter after the first bite, in the way his eyes, once locked to the floor, would flicker toward hers for a second longer each morning. He still didn't smile, but Maggie didn't mind. She wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't trying to save anyone. She just believed that no child should start their day hungry. Not in a country that claims to believe in opportunity, second chances, and grace. Outside the diner, the world continued to spin, but inside, for 40 quiet minutes each morning, a truce existed. Between past and present. Between fear and comfort. Between a woman who'd stopped believing in miracles and a boy who didn't know what one looked like. But mercy makes people uncomfortable. And kindness, especially the quiet, unrecorded kind, draws attention from those who confuse struggle with laziness and compassion with weakness. It started with whispers. He yours? No one just gives away food like that. Back in my day, kids learned to earn their meals. The regulars didn't always say it directly, but Maggie heard the judgment tucked between bites of bacon and slurps of burnt coffee. Some stared longer than usual. Some left without tipping. And one morning, a man in a suit, Bluetooth still in his ear, laughed as he passed the corner booth and muttered, "Feeding ghosts now?" Maggie didn't flinch. She'd seen cruelty in cleaner clothes before. She'd been a ghost once, too. Then came the manager. Clipboard in hand, voice tight with numbers and policy. "You're setting a precedent, Maggie. What if other kids start showing up? We're not a shelter." "I'm not asking us to be," she said, steady. "I'm paying for it." "With what? Your tips?" "With what I have," she answered. And that was the end of the conversation. That night, in her tiny apartment with a leaky faucet and a fridge that hummed too loudly, Maggie pulled a $10 bill from a coffee can marked "New Shoes." She scribbled a sticky note, "Breakfast Fund." Then she tucked it under the floorboard. Her feet would have to wait. Some things couldn't. The next morning, she prepared the plate like always. Jabari didn't look surprised, but that day, as she refilled his water, he spoke. "You don't have to." Maggie paused, looked at him, not down, not past, at. "I know," she said, "but I want to." In a country divided by class, color, and all the things we're told to fear in one another, that moment was a rebellion, a quiet one. No cameras, no headlines, just a woman with aching feet and a boy with tired eyes, choosing, for one small slice of time, not to give in to indifference. And still, outside, the world spun on. But inside that booth, something holy was happening, something rare, something you don't notice until it's gone. And when it was, when Jabari didn't come back, what remained wasn't just an empty seat. It was the weight of a story still unfolding, one that demanded to be seen through. The first morning Jabari didn't show, Maggie told herself it was the cold. Maybe he missed the bus. Perhaps he was sick. She still made the pancakes. She still placed them on the corner booth, the way she had for nearly 7 weeks. Plate slightly turned, napkin folded left, syrup warmed. She didn't wait for applause. She never had. By 7:55, the pancakes were still untouched. The booth remained empty. She cleared the plate with hands that moved like they always did, but inside, something had cracked. The next morning, she did it again. Same plate, same hope, same absence. On the third morning, Gloria passed by the booth with her tray and muttered, "Told you. Strays always disappear when they've had their fill." Maggie didn't answer. Because Jabari didn't eat like someone looking for handouts, he ate like someone who hadn't been permitted to be hungry. Days turned to a week. Then 2. Maggie didn't stop setting the plate. She couldn't, because to stop was to admit he was gone. And she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. That's when the Facebook post appeared. Someone had snapped a picture through the window. The empty booth, the untouched plate, the look on Maggie's face when she thought no one was watching. The caption read, "Rosie's Diner, now serving imaginary charity cases." The comments were worse. Publicity stunt. Feeding ghosts. Lonely woman playing savior. They didn't know Jabari, but Maggie knew the type. The kind of people who turned compassion into comedy and shame into currency. That night, in the silence of her one-room apartment, Maggie did something she hadn't done in years. She opened the wooden box beneath her bed. Inside, her father's field journal. He'd carried it through 2 tours in Iraq. The pages were worn, the ink faded, but his words never lost their weight. Shared half my rations with a boy today. The kid couldn't have been older than 8. Didn't say a word, just ate and nodded. Johnson said I was soft. Maybe I am. But I'd rather be soft than forget what hunger looks like. She closed the journal with shaking hands. Sat there for a long time, the sound of her father's voice echoing in her chest, louder than any insult on the internet. 23 mornings without Jabari. And then, the silence broke. At 9:17 a.m., 4 black SUVs rolled into the diner parking lot like thunderclouds. Engines still humming, doors opened in perfect synchronization. Men in dress uniforms stepped out, each bearing medals that caught the Kansas sun like fire. Inside the diner, forks stopped midair. The bell above the door rang like a shot. Maggie stood frozen, apron stained with syrup, heart pounding. A tall officer stepped forward, face weathered, eyes solemn. "Are you Maggie Wells?" he asked. She nodded. "I have a message for you," he said, pulling a sealed envelope from his chest pocket. "From Master Sergeant Elijah James. He was Jabari's father." The rest of the diner disappeared. There was only the letter, the officer's voice, and the boy she hadn't stopped believing in. The letter read, "If I don't make it home, please find the woman who fed my son without asking questions. Tell her she didn't just feed him. She protected him. She gave him a reason to keep showing up." Maggie didn't cry. Not then. But something in her, the part that never quite healed, stood taller than it had in years. The booth was no longer empty. It had become sacred. The letter now lived behind the counter. Framed in simple wood, tucked just high enough not to draw attention, but close enough that Maggie could touch it when the world made her doubt. Most customers never asked about it. Some glanced. A few paused. But the ones who understood, veterans, widows, teachers, single mothers, would look once, nod slowly, and leave a tip larger than the meal. The plaque came next. Mark, the same manager who once scolded her for setting a bad precedent, showed up early one morning with a small American flag and a brass plate in his hands. He didn't say much, just screwed it into the wall above the corner booth where Jabari once sat. The engraving read, "Reserved for those who serve and for those who wait for them." Nobody laughed. Not anymore. What began as a quiet kindness now hummed like a heartbeat through the diner's walls. Soldiers passing through town made detours to sit in that booth. Some left behind unit patches. Others brought challenge coins or photos. One man, fresh from deployment, sat silently for an hour, then placed a folded flag on the table and walked out. The wall behind the counter slowly transformed. A patchwork of gratitude stitched in metal, ink, and memory. A badge from a New York firefighter. A postcard from a Navy medic stationed in Okinawa. A child's drawing that read simply, "Thank you for feeding my hero." And then, one afternoon in spring, Jabari returned. He was taller now, shoulders broader, face fuller, but those eyes, steady and searching, hadn't changed. He walked in with his grandfather, who waited by the door while the boy approached Maggie, one hand behind his back. He didn't speak right away. He just smiled. The kind of smile you save for people who saw you before you became someone the world respected. Then he held out the coin. It was heavy, made of brass, and engraved on both sides. One side bore the insignia of the U.S. Special Forces. The other read, Semper Memor, always remembered. Maggie didn't ask where he'd been, didn't press for details. She just wrapped her fingers around the coin, as if it were a seed planted long ago that had finally bloomed in her palm. Jabari said softly, My dad used to say heroes wear uniforms, but I think sometimes they wear aprons. She nodded, voice catching. And sometimes they come back to say thank you. After they left, Maggie walked to the window and changed the sign. It had been the same for 20 years. Breakfast served all day. But now it said, Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry. She didn't need press coverage. She didn't want headlines. She wanted empty stomachs to find comfort and unseen souls to be noticed, just once, without judgment. Hope Street Diner didn't become famous. It became sacred, not because of what was served, but because of who was seen. And long after Maggie's hands had stopped pouring coffee, that booth remained. The pancakes still came warm, and sometimes, when no one was looking, the new girl behind the counter would glance at the empty chair, smile faintly, and whisper, This one's on the house. Because kindness doesn't need a name, it only needs to be passed on. Years passed, but the story never left the bones of the town. People still talked about the boy with the book, the woman with the apron, and the letter that turned a simple diner into something more. Hope Street didn't become a tourist attraction. It became a kind of whisper, spoken in quiet corners of military bases, classrooms, shelters, and homes where someone had once been hungry. The diner never grew bigger. Maggie never franchised it. But her story traveled farther than she ever could. A retired general, after reading about her in a quiet corner of a military newsletter, sent a check with no return address and a sticky note that read, In honor of the woman who fed my brother's son. A schoolteacher in Ohio began each semester by sharing the story with her students, not as a lecture on kindness, but a reminder that someone always notices when you choose grace over judgment. A waitress in Montana started a board behind her counter called the Maggie List, where regulars could buy a meal in advance for someone they hadn't met yet. It caught on. Within months, over 40 diners across the country had some version of it. Pay it forward, one plate ahead, the Jabari meal. And though Maggie never joined social media, someone else had long ago shared her story again, this time with context, with reverence. Not the mocking photo of an empty booth, but a video of the Special Forces salute, the folded flag, the letter read aloud beneath fluorescent lights, and the clink of coffee cups. It went viral for all the right reasons. Not rage, not politics, just a reminder of the goodness we forget still exists. One evening, nearly 7 years after that first pancake, Maggie sat by the window alone, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. Her hair was grayer now, her hands are slower, but her eyes, those same eyes that had once recognized a hunger deeper than food, still carried light. The door opened. A teenage girl walked in, hesitant but purposeful. She looked like she'd spent more nights on couches than in beds. Maggie smiled. Booth or counter? The girl paused, then nodded toward the far corner. As Maggie poured water and walked over, she saw something tucked into the girl's back pocket. A worn paperback. Same seat, same silence, same kind of storm behind the eyes. No questions, just a plate of pancakes. And the next morning, another. Because Maggie had learned, long ago, that sometimes the legacy of kindness isn't in the headlines or the speeches. It's in how you choose to show up for the next stranger. It's in the quiet space you leave open, just in case someone needs to sit down and feel, for once, like they belong. Long after her apron was folded and her name etched on a small brass plaque beneath the flag in that booth, The pancakes still came. Warm. Simple. Waiting. Because someone had once been fed without being asked why. And someone else had never forgotten. It was a Tuesday. Not special. Not a holiday. Just one of those gray sky mornings when the world feels a little heavier for no reason at all. Maggie had been pouring coffee for a retired mechanic, complaining about the weather when the bell over the diner door chimed. She didn't look up right away. Too many years, too many mornings, too many faces. But then, the room shifted. It wasn't loud. Just still. Like something sacred had entered quietly. He was taller now, shoulders square, chin lifted. The bones of his face were sharper, but his eyes hadn't changed. They were still steady, still searching, still soft in the corners like someone who'd learned not to expect softness in return. He walked alone. No uniform, no ceremony. Just a dark hoodie, worn jeans, and a presence that made Maggie's knees go weak. She set the coffee pot down mid-pour. For the first time in years, her hands shook. Jabari. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. He saw her. Saw her. And then he smiled, the kind of smile that only comes from survival. They stood that way for a moment. Two people with 1,000 silent mornings between them, suddenly standing in the same light again. Then he stepped forward and reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers curled around something small and solid. "I've been carrying this," he said, voice deeper but familiar. "Since Colorado. Grandpa said it should come back here." He placed it in her hand. A challenge coin. Brass, worn smooth around the edges, but the engraving still sharp. Semper Memor, always remembered. Maggie blinked, holding it as if it were something holy, like a prayer that had finally returned, answered in its own time. He hesitated, then pulled something else from his jacket. A folded piece of lined notebook paper. Handwritten. Crinkled. Real. "I wrote this back then," he said, clearing his throat. "Didn't know how to send it, so I kept it." She unfolded the letter, read each word slowly. A boy's handwriting. A man's heart. "Dear Miss Maggie, thank you for never asking why, for pancakes without question, for warmth when I had none. Dad used to say real heroes wear boots. They wear aprons, too. You didn't save me with speeches. You saved me with syrup. I never forgot. Love. Jabari." She folded it again, pressing it to her chest like armor. They sat at the booth after that. No rush, no cameras, just two people sharing silence like a second language. She brought him pancakes, same order as always, extra butter. He ate more slowly now, like someone who wasn't afraid the food might vanish. When he finished, he looked around the diner, the faded walls, the buzzing light, the quiet weight of gratitude hanging in the air. "This place still feels like safety," he said softly. Maggie smiled. "That's all I ever wanted it to be." And outside, the world went on. But inside, something closed, and something opened. Because sometimes, the story doesn't end with the goodbye. Sometimes, it waits. Until the one who left walks back in. The new sign wasn't announced with speeches. No ribbon cutting, no press release, no Facebook post begging for likes. It appeared one Monday morning, just after sunrise, when the sky was still the color of cooled steel, and the only sounds on Hope Street were Maggie's keys unlocking the front door, and the buzz of the ancient neon open light flickering to life. The sign was simple, white letters painted by hand on stained pine, and hung just inside the diner's fogged front window. It read, "Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry." No one asked where it came from. No one needed to. Maggie hung it herself with a hammer that once belonged to her father, The same one who taught her that dignity wasn't something you gave. It was something you refused to take away. Some customers didn't notice. Some rolled their eyes. A few grumbled about setting a bad example. But they still ate their breakfast, still drank their coffee, still came back the next day. Others, though, the ones who understood, left folded bills beside their empty plates. No tips for service. Just quiet support for the sign in the window. The ripple began there. At first, it was small. A man in work boots bought a sandwich for the next kid who needs one. A woman in scrubs left an envelope with $20 and a note. For the booth that fed someone braver than me. Then came the high school counselor who started dropping off Target gift cards, just in case someone comes in without gloves. A bus driver offered to deliver pancakes to the park on his early route. Even Mark, the manager who once counted every slice of bacon like it came out of his paycheck, started rounding up tabs from folks who looked a little worn. Maggie didn't tell anyone what to do. She never made it a policy. She just kept showing up. Same apron, same smile, same warmth poured into a cup of coffee like it might reach someone's bones. And yet, everything changed. Hope Street Diner became more than a stop on the way to somewhere else. It became an anchor, a place where the tired could rest, the forgotten could be seen, and the hungry could eat without shame. One morning, a man in a sharp suit stopped by, not a regular. He stared at the sign for a long while before ordering nothing but black coffee. When he paid, he slid a check across the counter and said quietly, "This is for whoever's afraid to ask." The check was for $5,000. Maggie never spoke of it. She just bought extra pancake mix and kept the lights on through the winter. Because rules are just words until they're lived, and this one wasn't about charity. It was about memory. About a booth once filled by a quiet boy with tired eyes. About a woman who fed him when no one else saw him. And about the people who, years later, still walk into that diner, read the sign, and realize they don't have to prove they're worthy of being fed. They just have to be human. It was just past 7 when the girl walked in. Maybe 11, maybe 12. Her hoodie was 2 sizes too big, with sleeves that were chewed at the cuffs. She moved like someone used to being told she was in the way. Shoulders tucked in, gaze low, hands clutched around the strap of a fraying backpack. She didn't look at the menu, didn't approach the counter. She just hovered near the window, scanning the booths like she wasn't sure if she belonged. Maggie saw her the way she once saw Jabari. Not just the hunger, but the quiet calculation behind it. The way kids like her measured distance, exits, kindness. The way they were taught to survive was to remain silent unless spoken to, not to hope unless handed permission. Maggie didn't ask her name. She didn't ask if she had money. She simply walked behind the counter, pulled a plate from the warmer, and brought it over. Pancakes, warm, syrup on the side, napkin folded left. She set it down gently. "Eat while it's hot," she said. "That's the only rule here." The girl looked up, startled, not by the food, but by the absence of questions. She didn't speak, just nodded, picked up the fork. From the counter, Maggie watched her take the first bite, slowly and cautiously. Then another, then faster. Maggie didn't interrupt, didn't hover. She simply refilled a coffee cup, wiped down the register, and let the moment settle like sunlight through the blinds. Somewhere behind her, the challenge coin still rested in its frame. The letter from Jabari still hung where only those who looked carefully would find it. The sign in the window, aged now from seasons of weather, still read, "No one leaves hungry." And now, neither did she. Because kindness, once planted, never really dies. It waits. For the next child, the next empty plate. The following person is brave enough to hope someone might see them, and not ask why they're hungry. That morning, Maggie didn't just feed a stranger. She passed the flame. Some stories don't end. They echo. Long after the pancakes are gone, After the child has grown, after the diner's lights flicker off for the night, something lingers. A warmth, a knowing, a quiet question in the heart. Would I have done the same? That's the power of unseen kindness, of feeding someone without needing their name, of believing in dignity before asking for proof. Maggie didn't change the world. She changed one morning for one boy. But that was enough to ripple across time, hearts, and headlines. Now the question belongs to us. Will we look away, or will we set the table? If this story stayed with you, share it. Let someone else feel what you just felt. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that don't just entertain, but awaken. And if you've ever been Jabari or Maggie, tell us in the comments. Your story might be the one that saves someone tomorrow. Thank you for watching. See you in the following video.